What's going on, everybody? I'm just your standard, everyday, typical Canadian nerd here to react to the wonderful and amazing, everyday, normal, standard American Tyler Bucket here to react to learning about our strategic maple syrup reserve. Yes, it's a real thing. He's really going to learn about it, and we're going to watch that today. I'm not here to criticize him. I'm just here because, well, as much Canadians have done since he began his channel, we have been watching his videos and just talking to our phones, being like, didn't you know this? How could you not know this? Oh, but you're forgetting this. And I might not know everything, but I know a lot of things. So let's get right into this, get this picture out of here, and press play.
What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, standard American here today to learn and react to Canada has a secret vault full of maple syrup. Did you know that? Because I sure didn't. I randomly got this video recommended to me in my YouTube feed or something. The overlords at YouTube destined me to watch this, and with a title like that, how could I ignore it?
Fair.
Does Canada really have a secret vault full of maple syrup?
Yes, we do.
This just kind of propagates and encourages the stereotype Americans have that Canadians, I'm sorry, we think this, I don't know why, but we think Canadians are a bit obsessed with maple syrup.
Well, you think that because we are the ones who make the maple syrup. It comes from here. It's exclusive to Canada as far as I'm aware, and then we ship it across the world. It's kind of our thing. Now, it's a better source of sugar than raw sugar. It's a healthier version than honey in many respects. No, maple syrup is just fantastic, and you can see here in this picture that he's stuck on, this is when we pour the maple syrup over snow and it becomes kind of like a solid taffy candy, which is a real thing. It's kind of like the snow cone, only better, and let's get into it.
Honestly, of all the things in the world to be obsessed about, not the worst thing. I can get on board if I'm having some pancakes, but to have a secret vault full of it, is this a government thing? Is this an end of the world thing? I just have so many questions.
Yes, is the answer.
But that's what we're here for, right? To answer those, hopefully. Anyway, let's find out. Oh, I learned about this. In one of my other reactions, making taffy by putting maple syrup on snow.
Now, this actually makes me wonder, like, when it comes to syrup, how many people actually have maple syrup in the United States? Often it's table syrup, which is made of corn syrup. And if you have maple syrup, well, you're welcome.
If that's what's happening here, that could be sugar. But I thought I heard about that in another video. But yeah, I never had heard about that. It sounded crazy, but when I see it here, it's actually not all that crazy. It's just something that never in a million years has ever happened in America.
Well, that's because you don't get quite the same amount of snow, nor do you have the sugar shacks, sugar bushes, sugar maple farms.
Unless you're weird. You weird Canadians. No.
Oh, yeah, you're weird Americans for not having real maple syrup.
I'm sorry. It's actually probably very delicious, and there are much stranger things happening probably with American food, much more unhealthy things as well, sadly. Anyway.
Yeah, my porridge recipe, which one of these days I'll actually post, I used to have 1 tablespoon of sugar, and then I did the math, 16 grams of sugar. That's half the recommended maximum daily allowance of sugar. So I substituted the tablespoon of raw sugar, and now I do 1 teaspoon of maple syrup, and I tell you, so much better.
Anyway.
Real maple.
Oh, no. Ah, we're back. Okay.
Real maple syrup is a special treat. It's sweet with notes of caramel, and it's the perfect consistency for fluffy pancakes. To
Yeah.
be clear, I'm not talking about this stuff. I'm talking about this.
Yeah.
Oh, are we kind of talking about how in America maple syrup is all synthetic and like factory created with sterile lab chemicals?
No, really, look at your bottle of what you think is syrup and see if it's actually maple syrup, because odds are it's going to be table syrup.
To perfectly make our taste buds love it.
It's the high fructose corn syrup. Yeah. Yeah, it's all about the sugar because Merca.
And we're slaves to the fake maple corporation.
Yeah.
And Canada has legit from the tree maple syrup.
Correct.
But actually, I like to actually forget about stuff like that because it's just yet another thing. Canadians with their actual pure, delicious maple syrup just makes me jealous.
In Canada, it's called liquid gold, and that's not just because of its amber.
Is that true?
I mean, to some people, yeah. Especially the maple syrup farmers, because that's how they make their money.
Do Canadians actually refer to maple syrup as liquid gold?
I mean, once or twice, I'm pretty sure.
And if you do, I respect it.
For hue, pure maple syrup is 28 times more expensive than crude oil. 1 liter of this sweet stuff is worth about 12 Canadian dollars and 13 cents. Maple
What?
syrup is
The syrup is more valuable than crude oil?
I mean, ounce for ounce, yes.
What is going on here? What timeline are we in?
The weirdest timeline.
Okay. I didn't know that. That is a fun fact. And, God knows I'm having fun.
such a valuable commodity that a group of Canadian producers stockpiles it in their global strategic maple syrup reserve in Quebec.
It's real.
It's real.
This is real.
It's real.
Who is stockpiling it?
Quebecois.
Exactly.
Maple syrup is such a valuable commodity that a group of Canadian producers stockpiles it in their global strategic maple syrup reserve in Quebec.
Maple syrup producers, a group of them. So this isn't some kind of government funded maple syrup vault deep under the earth for the Canadian population to survive on.
I think it kinda is. Like, can't things be more than one thing?
In case of the apocalypse. Okay. Interesting.
This treasure trove contains over 94,000 barrels of liquid gold.
It's kind of comparable to the American cheese reserve, right? I mean, I'm sure Tyler knows about the cheese reserves.
Which is worth over $130 million.
This is like an investment as well. It's just appreciating in value, probably. It's like sitting on a vault of gold bars or something. This is starting to get me a little excited, actually.
And now, it's protected like the most secure banks in the world.
Okay.
So, how do you think a group of men stole 3,000 tons of maple syrup from the reserve in 2012?
What? I thought we were just learning about the vault of maple syrup, the syrup reserve.
Yeah, this is making me think, just a few years ago, there was a lot of cheese smuggling going across the southern, northern border here. The cheese reserves, the cheese smuggling, the syrup theft.
I didn't know this was going to turn into a heist story. Okay. But I'm not complaining.
Did they siphon it off through an underground tunnel? Did they replace the syrup with water? Or did they use a plan inspired by Hollywood heist movies?
Gonna go with 2, but I can't
bet
remember.
It was like a Hollywood movie. How are you, or the tunnel? I don't know why they would replace it with water, unless it was, then it might have been an inside job and replacing it with water so no one would tell. If you were just a thief, I was just thinking, why bother replacing it with anything? You just steal it and never be heard from again.
Well, that comes down to truck weigh-ins.
Why refill it? But could just be to cover your tracks. I don't know. I have no idea.
let's dig into the sticky history of
Notice how I kind of said all three were possible, just so no matter what, I am not wrong.
this liquid gold. You can tap most maple trees, but the
I guess if you're never right, you're also not wrong.
sweetest and most popular tree for syrup is the sugar maple, or Acer
Oh.
saccharum.
Okay.
These trees are ancient giants. Some are over 300 years old and can be as tall as 35 meters.
I actually have watched some maple syrup harvesting from trees in videos just throughout my life.
Seen it in person. It's not very different from videos.
Just because it's interesting. It's just like an interesting process to watch.
Slow.
Their sap contains 2 to 3% sugar, which is what makes maple syrup so delicious and caloric. But unlike sugar, maple syrup has a hefty dose of minerals and 24 antioxidants. So what you're saying is take it like medicine, roger that.
Right. So the actual natural maple syrup, at least in Canada, straight from the tree, has lots of natural antioxidants and vitamins, minerals. Just more reason for you to scarf down maple syrup nonstop. Okay.
That's why I only get maple syrup. If there's any other kind of syrup on the store shelf, I ignore it. If there's anything like at a Denny's, I ignore it. Well, I mean, to be fair, I also prefer French toast without syrup.
Just kidding. Maple trees are so embedded in Canada's national identity that its flag carries a maple leaf.
Yeah, but I learned about the Canadian flag, and that is not necessarily, from my understanding, because of maple syrup. That's a bit of an oversimplification. That's like a funny way to say it. The maple leaf has a long, long history in Canada,
So does maple syrup. Stuff can be two things.
going way back as a symbol of its people, from what I learned. So I actually know a little about that.
But its roots go even deeper. Indigenous people collected maple syrup centuries before European settlers got a taste.
I just realized, syrup, you get it out of a tree by making a hole.
Well,
They
yeah.
could have been doing this forever ago, and they were.
Well, yeah, we didn't figure that out just because we showed up on this land and were like, hey, trees, let's take the tree blood and boil it. No, we had to learn it from someone.
I've never thought of that. Because I only think of the synthetic factory, perfectly bottled maple syrup I get in a pretty package on my countertop. You don't think about how, well, if you were living in the wilderness and you figured this out, you could harvest. So it's strictly worse.
I don't know what happened there. Let's try to go back just a few seconds and try that again.
Food throughout the long winters.
Nope.
I've never thought of
Okay.
that. Because I only think of the synthetic factory, perfectly bottled maple syrup I get in a pretty package on my countertop. You don't think about how,
Yeah, it's
well,
probably not
if you
maple.
were living in the wilderness and you figured this out, you could harvest something delicious even as someone hundreds of years ago. That's actually really cool to think about, and that they did do that.
The Haudenosaunee used sap to cook venison. This inspired the maple-cured meats we still eat today.
Yeah.
And the Anishinaabe preserved food in maple sap, keeping food throughout the long winters.
Oh.
Indigenous people
Maple is just the gift that keeps on giving. I'm
So good.
starting to understand why Canadians are so obsessed with it. No. I'm sure Canadians are not obsessed with maple syrup, but it's definitely more a part of the culture than America.
Absolutely. Like the maple glazed ham around the holiday time. So good.
And that's okay. I actually think that's cool. So, yeah.
taught French settlers to tap maples and gather syrup. Jacques Cartier was the first settler.
The equivalent, I was just thinking, what's the equivalent to America? Ranch dressing. we put ranch dressing. But you can't get ranch dressing from a tree. So
And do you preserve your foods in ranch dressing? Do you cure meats in ranch dressing? Do you do like ranch glazed ham at Christmas?
it's strictly worse.
To mention maple syrup in 1557, but it wasn't until the late 1700s that European settlers began to produce this treat. Today,
Okay.
most maple syrup comes from a vast hardwood forest that spans from the Midwestern U.S. up into eastern Canada.
Ranch dressing? Really? I mean, ranch dressing. I was thinking like agave syrup, but ranch dressing. Ranch dressing?
Oh, I didn't realize that there was a kind of a dedicated forest. It makes sense now that you present it like this. A dedicated forest filled probably to the brim with sugar maple trees, where most of the world's production of maple syrup comes from, or at least in Canada.
Well, yeah, they tend to grow in forests, and forests tend to have trees that are similar to the other trees in the forest. That makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
This region is called, guess what it's called? The Maple Belt. And
Ah, the Maple Belt. Okay.
92% of Canada's maple farms are in Quebec. So how would you go about
92%?
92% of
92% of maple production is in Quebec?
Quebec also gets colder temperatures, which is essential to making the sap that comes from the maple tree.
Damn.
Canada's maple farms are in Quebec. So how would you go about making maple syrup? First, you need to know when the time is right. Sugar settles in the sap during winter, and it begins to flow with the first spring thaw.
Actually, that makes me realize, as global warming progresses, maple syrup costs will increase and availability will decrease, which is why it's a really good thing we have the strategic maple syrup reserve.
Yeah, I know there's a whole art to this, to maple syrup production, creation, distilling, and knowing the times of the year and all that. Yeah. It's honestly all really interesting.
When the temperatures reach above 0 degrees Celsius during the day, but the nights are still frosty, you know that the sugar maple is ready. This is called the tapping season, but your
Right.
work is just starting. The sap is still 98% water by weight, so you take the sap to a sugar house. Here, the raw sap gets boiled down until it becomes the sticky, sugary stuff we all love, and we do love it. At this
Wow, 98% water? Jeez, you lose a lot of your harvest if the majority of that water boils out to get to the syrup.
Which is why authentic maple syrup has such a high price per liter.
Man, 98%. Is syrup a major export or even something that's very important to the Canadian economy?
Yeah.
Now that we're really getting into the weeds here of the maple syrup production, I would be interested to know.
point,
Yes, very much so. In fact, I went out to the Costco yesterday and asked my sister if there's anything she wanted. She said, get her a whole flat of maple syrup. And I'm like, a flat what? Like flat as in an apartment? A flat as in the flatbed cart? Or like, she said like a flat cardboard box that has the plastic wrapped around it. So you can just pick up the whole box of cans or jugs and don't have to pick out individual, So she wanted a 12-pack of maple syrup in cans.
the syrup is 33% water and 67% sugar.
Okay.
Delicious. Some of that maple syrup might end up in the Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve. This brings
Yeah.
us to the final chapter of our story.
Wait, now it's the global strategic maple syrup reserve?
Well, it is the maple syrup reserve, which makes it not just Canadian, not just Quebecois, not just national, not just continental, but global, because I don't know if we're getting any maple syrup from any other planets.
Is that different than the reserve at the beginning?
I was joking. Of course we don't get maple syrup from other planets.
because it has the word global in it. Has the whole world banded together to create a reserve of maple syrup? I know that's not true, but I wish it was. And it'd be like the 10th wonder of the world, going to this giant chasm filled with maple syrup, which you may never return from again.
The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. While it sounds
right.
like something from a movie,
Yeah.
the heist was pretty simple. The men in charge of the plant rented space in a warehouse where the syrup is stockpiled. This way they could go to and from the space without raising suspicion.
I knew it was an inside job. I at least suspected that. It was probably an inside job.
Working between midnight and dawn, the thieves loaded tractor trailers full of stolen barrels of syrup.
My
They
God.
took them to a sugar shack, emptied the syrup, and replaced it with water.
Okay. So, inside job, you spend all night stealing all this maple syrup because you're addicted, because you're that much of a maple syrup addict that you have to steal 10,000 barrels of it.
I'm just interested in why they brought it to a sugar shack. Was it to reprocess it and then sell it again? I guess so.
To quench your irresistible thirst, unquenchable thirst. And then you put water back in because you still kind of own a space there and you don't want anyone to notice. I see.
They returned the worthless barrels to their places at the reserve. During the annual inventory check, someone realized the reserve had been robbed.
They probably couldn't believe it when they finally found out.
But the thieves did not get away with it, and police
Oh.
arrested 25 men. So
25 guys? And they got caught. Wow. The syrup was eventually, like to us all, our ultimate downfall. That should be a philosophy book.
Yeah, each of those barrels was about 200 liters, if my math is correct, which it might not be because I'm not a math guy, but if that's true, that's like, for 3 barrels, that would be something along the lines of $40,000.
I don't know what it would teach you. Probably make you dumber. If I wrote it.
if you guessed answer number 2, you were correct.
I did.
The
Okay.
most maple syrupiest, if that's a thing. Next
that
time you
guy
make
doing?
yourself a big breakfast,
He was bathing in maple syrup.
why not spring for some pure maple syrup? It tastes great on bacon. Speaking of
Okay. That was a good video. Origins of food.
Yes.
I liked that.
That was good.
Very good.
Well done.
Very interesting. Honestly, a lot of that video started talking about the production and the economy of maple syrup, which I don't mind. It's honestly pretty fascinating.
You gotta learn it somehow.
But this did not, at the beginning I was kind of wondering, how much does maple syrup mean to Canadians? Actually, if we're not trolling anymore, how much do Canadians think about maple syrup? How much do they eat maple syrup? Because I do not know the answer to that.
Well, that varies from person to person. We think about maple syrup pretty much any time that syrup would come up in culinary practices, anytime we are shopping for syrup, anytime we go to a breakfast place. Oftentimes when we look at the flag, we are reminded of syrup. And yeah, some people actually do drink the syrup. That's a lot of sugar. If you do that, check with your doctor about your insulin levels.
And I want to know, especially now that we're talking about maple syrup reserves.
Maple syrup does mean a lot to Canadians. I don't know what our reaction would be like if the sugar maple died, if we stopped being able to create maple syrup. I think some of us would lose the will to live.
Which apparently exist, but it might be under the control of some companies, some maple syrup producers, and they didn't really explain why they have it, except that it's worth a ton of money. It's liquid gold. They have tons of barrels, like 97,000 barrels, if I'm remembering correctly. So unless I'm forgetting, they didn't really give the explanation for why do we have this in the event of do we need this for, which just leads me to wonder, and my imagination just goes, maybe the Canadians just want all this maple syrup in backup because it's in such demand.
So that is one part of it. Now, of course, economy is based on supply demand. Okay, so some years the supply is higher than other years, and the demand may be lower or higher on other years. So we have to make sure that we have enough supply in backup to meet demand, especially if the production begins to decrease. We need to make sure that we are able to keep up with the demand.
Which is why I need to know how much maple syrup. You know what? I can Google this. What am I doing with my life when I can Google about maple syrup facts right here, right?
Wow, yeah, it's so crazy that we can just look up anything we want to these days. Like, when I was growing up, if I wanted to know something or if I had a question, I was often told to refer to the encyclopedias, which were out of date, so they didn't have all the latest information. And then the internet happened. And I grew up with the internet, and still to this day, I forget that the internet is a resource I can go to find out answers to my questions.
How much maple syrup does Canada produce? That's a start. 14 million gallons in 2020. How Canada eat is the question, or consume. Consume. You could drink maple syrup, I suppose, not just eat it.
Eating and drinking are practically the same thing, aren't they?
The volume produced, this is talking about production. Which country consumes the most? The United Kingdom?
What?
Who knew? Or Germany?
Cool.
The United Kingdom. Oh, the USA!
All right.
Okay, I missed that. Yeah, that's just because we love to eat. And,
Especially sugar.
I mean, I don't even eat breakfast that often, so I don't even think about pancakes and maple syrup, but it is kind of an American staple.
The International House of Pancakes. I have never seen one in Canada.
Pancakes with syrup.
I'm not saying they don't exist in Canada. I'm just saying I personally haven't seen one with my eyes. Like, I've seen the signs for one down in Niagara Falls, but I don't think I've actually seen the store. I've never been in one, and I've never had food from an International House of Pancakes, or IHOP as it is otherwise known.
Waffles with syrup, not just syrup.
Yeah, McDonald's infuses syrup into some of their breakfast buns.
That's kind of the distinction between Canada.
At least they used to, and I don't know if it's real syrup, like maple syrup or some other syrup. I digress.
In America, I think. So maybe Canada, inside Canada's obsession with maple syrup, this is 5 years old. Oh, seriously, obsessed. Canada is obsessed with maple syrup. Is that slander? Is he correct, or is he exaggerating?
It's not wrong.
The reserve, the obsession. There are only... Cocktails might serve
True.
maple syrup? In the bars?
Some.
What? I don't know.
And when he mentioned Germany, I remembered, oh yeah, maple sausages. Totally a thing.
This might be something that I won't ever really have answered. I could ask a Canadian, or maybe someone can leave a comment about this. How much maple syrup really matters to Canadians. I mean,
A lot.
that's what I want to know. That's what I'm thinking about. Anyway, this was a very interesting video. I enjoyed this.
Me too.
Never knew about the secret vault of maple syrup. Now I know.
Good.
Is this common knowledge in Canada as well?
Yes.
Or is this kind of a not known little secret to Canadians as well?
Well, that's actually a good question. I am just your typical average Canadian nerd. Being a nerd, I am aware of it. And I expect other Canadians to be aware. I'm just not sure.
I don't know. But anyway, If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this
Or this one.
reaction,
That
feel
one.
free to give it a like or leave a comment. Tell me how much you like maple syrup.
Like it.
And if you're interested in more content like this, videos
Or
like
this one.
me
Cat.
reacting to Canadian
Him,
things,
me. Canadian
themes,
reacting to American.
history, events, culture,
Nerdery.
Canadian stuff.
Yeah,
Feel free
back,
to
yeah,
subscribe for
the
more
beard.
like this.
Yeah,
And until then,
subscribe.
thanks for watching, and
Thank
see you
you.
next time.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed this just even slightly as much as I did, and I hope y'all just keep being awesome. Bye. Science. Spirit. Life.